Hello and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will conclude our reading of Red Planet by Robert Heinlein. Our heroes have won and appear to have the wicked administrator of the colony cornered. Chapter 13. It's an Ultimatum. Rawlings himself had spent half the night locked up along with half a dozen other prominent citizens who had attempted to reason with Beecher. As the story got around, especially the matter of the deaths of the Pottles, Beecher found himself with no support at all, save from his own clique of sycophants and toadies and the professional, largely disinterested support of the company's police. Even Kruger cracked up under the strain, tried to get Beecher to reverse himself, and was stuffed in with the others, which by then included the chief engineer of the power plant. But it was Dr. Rawlings who talked the guard placed over them into risking his job and letting them go. The doctor was treating the guard's wife. "I don't think Beecher would ever stand trial even if we had him back on Earth," McCrae remarked about the matter to Rawlings and Marlowe. "What do you think, Doctor?" The three of them were seated in the outer offices of the Planet Office building. Marlowe had come there after getting word at the powerhouse from McCrae and had gotten busy at once, writing dispatches to the project camps and the other outlying activities, including North Colony itself, trying to round up boats. He had then tried, red-eyed and uncertain from lack of sleep, to compose a suitable report to Earth until McCrae had interrupted him and insisted that he get some rest first. "Paranoia," said Rawlings. "A clear case. My opinion, too. I've seen suggestive indications of it, but the case was not fully developed until his will was crossed. He must be hospitalized and restrained." Dr. Rawlings glanced over his shoulder at a closed door. Behind it was Beecher. Rawlings turned back. "What do you think of Howe, Doctor?" McCrae grunted. "Haven't seen enough of him to have an opinion. What do you plan to do with him, Jim?" he added, turning to Marlowe. Marlowe frowned. "Nothing. The only charges we can make stick aren't worth the trouble. We'll simply ship him back." McCrae nodded. "That's the ticket. Hanging's too good for him. Kick him out." "What worries me more," Marlowe went on, "is whom to get to replace him. The school has to be running again before we can leave for Copaeus. Why don't you volunteer to fill in, Doc? Temporarily, of course." McCrae stared. "Me? Heaven forbid." "Well, I've got to have somebody to ride herd on those youngsters, somebody who can do it without using a straitjacket. They all like you." "No, repeat emphatically, no." "There is a young fellow already with the school," volunteered Rawlings, "whom Professor Steuben was grooming for the job when the company sent Howe instead. Chap named Vanderlinden. Seems a good, sensible sort. My boy likes him." Marlowe looked interested. "I ran into him. He was helpful. Of course, I don't have any real authority to appoint him." McCrae snorted. "Jamie, you'll be the death of me." Marlowe put down his coffee cup and wiped his mouth. "All that as may be, I think I'll stretch out on one of those desks for a couple of hours. Doc, will you see that someone wakes me?" "Certainly," agreed McCrae, having no intention of allowing the man to be disturbed until he was fully rested. "Don't worry." Jim and the others were back at the school, where they were to remain until boats could be gotten to take them to Copaeus. Mrs. Palmer was bustling around with her assistants, getting a mammoth breakfast for weary men and boys. Jim himself was dead tired and hungry, but much too excited to think about sleeping, even though dawn had broken outside. He had just received a cup of coffee and was blowing on it when Smythe showed up. "Say, I understood you really did kill that cop that took a pot shot at me." "No," Jim denied. "He's in the infirmary now, just wounded. I've seen him." Smythe looked troubled. "Oh, shucks," he said finally. "It won't happen more than once in a lifetime. Here's your IOU." Jim stared at him. "Smitty, you're sick." "Probably. Better take it." Jim reached back into his subconscious memory and quoted his father. "No thanks. Marlowes pay their debts." Smith looked at him, then said, "Oh, the heck with you, you ungracious twerp." He tore the IOU into small pieces and stalked away. Jim looked wonderingly after him. Now, what was he sore about? He decided to look up Frank and tell him about it. He found Frank, but had no time to tell him about it. A shout came through the crowd. "Marlowe! Jim Marlowe!" Captain Marlowe's at the planet office, someone answered. Not him, the kid, the first boy replied. Jim Marlowe, you're wanted up front right away. Coming, Jim yelled. What for? He pushed his way toward the entrance, Frank behind him. The man who had paged him let him get close before he answered. You won't believe it. I don't myself. Martians. Jim and Frank hurried outside. Gathered in front of the school door were more than a dozen Martians. Gecko was there and Gakuro, but not Kumbuch. Nor could Jim make out the old one whom he thought of as the head man of Gecko's tribe. Gecko spotted them and said in his own speech, Greetings, Jim Marlowe. Greetings, Frank Sutton, friends sealed with water. Another voice came out from one of Gecko's palm flaps. Hey, Jim boy! Willis had come home with the bacon. A little late, perhaps, but successfully. Another voice boomed mellowly. Gecko listened, then said, Where is he who stole our little one? Jim, uncertain of the dominant tongue at best, was not sure that he had understood. Huh? He wants to know where Howe is, said Frank, and answered in fluent, fairly accurate Martian. Howe was still where he had taken refuge, still afraid to face Kelly, despite repeated invitations. Gecko indicated that he would come into the building. Amazed but cooperative, the boys led him in. Gecko was forced to fold himself into a shape resembling a hat rack to get into the lock, but he managed it. The lock was large. Inside, the sensation caused by his appearance was like that which might have resulted from introducing an elephant into a church. People gave way before him. The door to the outer office was even more of a squeeze than the airlock, but Gecko made it, with Jim and Frank trailing him. Gecko handed Willis to Jim, then gently explored the handle of the door to Howe's office with a hand flap. Suddenly he pulled, and the door came away. Not only the lock broken, but the door wrenched completely off its hinges. He squatted down further, completely filling the door frame. The boys looked at each other. Willis closed up. They heard Howe saying, What's the meaning of this? Who are... Then Gecko stood up as well as he could in a room invented for humans and started for the outer door. The boys hesitated. Frank said, Let's see what he did to him. He stopped at the wrecked door and looked in. I don't see him. Hey, Jim, he's not in here at all. Nor was he. They hurried after Gecko and reached him at the airlock. No one stopped Gecko. No one stopped them. The repeated indoctrination concerning Martians swept a path before them. Outside, Gecko turned to them. Where is the other one who would do harm to the little one? Frank explained that Beecher was some distance away and not available. You will show us, announced Gecko, and picked them both up. Another Martian relieved him of Frank. Jim felt himself cradled in the soft palm flaps, even as Willis was still cradled in Jim's arms. Willis extended his eyes, looked around, and remarked, Fine ride, huh? Jim was not sure. The Martians ambled through town at an easy 8 miles an hour over the bridge into the planet offices. The pressure lock there was higher and larger than at the school. The entire party went inside. The ceiling of the building's foyer was quite high enough for even the tallest Martian. Once they were inside, Gecko set Jim down, as did the Martian carrying Frank. There had been the same scurrying surprise as at the school. McCrae came out and looked the situation over without excitement. What's all this jamboree? He asked. They want to talk to Beecher, Frank explained. McCrae raised his eyebrows, then spoke in clear Martian. One of them answered him. They conversed back and forth. Okay, I'll get him, agreed McCrae, then repeated it in Martian. He went into the offices. He returned in a few minutes, pushing Beecher in front of him and followed by Rawlings and Marlowe. Some people to see you, McCrae said, and gave Beecher a shove that carried him out onto the floor of the foyer. This is the one? Inquired the Martian spokesman. This is verily the one. Beecher looked up at them. What do you want from me? He said in Basic. The Martians moved so they were on all sides of him. Now you get away from me, he said. They moved in slowly, tightening the circle. Beecher attempted to break out of it. A great hand flap was placed in his way. They closed in further. Beecher darted this way and that, then he was concealed completely from the spectators by a screen of palm flaps. Let me out, he was heard to shout. I didn't do anything. You've got no right to. His voice stopped in a scream. The circle relaxed and broke up. There was no one inside it, not even a spot of blood on the floor. The Martians headed for the door. Gecko stopped and said to Jim, Would you return with us, my friend? No, oh no, said Jim. I have to stay here, then remembered to translate. And the little one? Willis stays with me. That's right, isn't it, Willis? Sure, Jim boy. Then tell Gecko so. Willis complied. Gecko said farewell sadly to the boys and to Willis and went out of the lock. McCrae and Rawlings were in whispered, worried conference at the spot where Beecher had last been seen. Captain Marlowe was looking sleepy and confused and listening to them. Frank said, Let's get out of here, Jim. Right. The Martians were still outside. Gecko saw them as they came out, spoke to one of his kind, then said, Where is the learned one who speaks our speech? We would talk with him. I guess they mean Doc, said Frank. Is that what he meant? I think so. We'll call him. They went back inside and dug McCrae out of a cluster of excited humans. Doc, said Frank, they want to talk with you, the Martians. Eh? Said McCrae. Why me? I don't know. The doctor turned to Marlowe. How about it, Skipper? Do you want to sit in on this? Marlowe rubbed his forehead. No, I'm too confused to try to handle the language. You take it. Okay. Marlowe went for his suit and mask, let the boys help him dress, and then did not deny them when they tagged along. However, once outside, they held back and watched from a distance. McCrae walked down to the group standing on the ramp and addressed them. Voices boomed back at him. He entered the group, and the boys could see him talking, answering, gesticulating with hands. The conference continued quite a long time. Finally, McCrae dropped his arms to his sides and looked tired. Martian voices boomed in what was plainly farewell, then the whole party set out at a rapid, leisurely pace for the bridge and their own city. McCrae plodded back up the ramp. In the lock, Jim demanded, What was it all about, Doc? Eh? Hold your peace, son. Inside, McCrae took Marlowe's arm and led him toward the office they had preempted. You too, Rawlings. The rest of you get on with your business. Nevertheless, the boys tagged along and McCrae let them come in. You might as well hear it. You're in it up to your ears. Mind that door, Jim. Don't let anyone else open it. Now, what is it? Asked Jim's father. What are you looking so grim about? They want us to leave. Leave? Get off Mars. Go away. Go back to Earth. What? Why do they suggest that? It's not a suggestion. It's an order, an ultimatum. They aren't even anxious to give us time enough to get ships here from Earth. They want us to leave. Every man, jack, woman, and child. They want us to leave right away, and they aren't fooling. Chapter 14. Willis. 4 days later, Dr. McCrae stumbled into the same office. Marlowe still looked tired, but this time it was McCrae who looked exhausted. Get these other people out of here, Skipper. Marlowe dismissed them and closed the door. Well, you got my message? Yes. Is the Proclamation of Autonomy written? Did the folks go for it? Yes, it's written. We cribbed a good deal from the American Declaration of Independence, but we wrote one. I'm not interested in the rhetoric of the thing. How about it? It's ratified easily enough here. We had quite a few startled queries from the project camps, but it was accepted. I guess we owe Beecher a vote of thanks on that. He made independence seem like a fine idea. We owe Beecher nothing. He nearly got us all killed. Just how do you mean that? I'll tell you, but I want to know about the declaration. I had to make some promises. It's gone off? Radioed to Chicago last night. Too soon to expect an answer. Let me ask the questions. Were you successful? Yes. McCrae rubbed his eyes wearily. We can stay. It was a great fight, Ma, but I won. They'll let us stay. Marlowe got up and started to set up a wire recorder. Do you want to talk it into the record to save having to go over it again? McRae waved it away. No, whatever formal report I make will have to be very carefully edited. I'll try to tell you about it first. He paused and looked thoughtful. Jamie, how long has it been since men first landed on Mars? More than 50 Earth years, isn't it? I believe I've learned more about Martians in the past few hours than was learned in all that time. And yet I don't know anything about them. We kept trying to think of them as human, trying to force them into our molds. But they aren't human. They aren't anything like us at all. He added, they had interplanetary flight millions of years back, had it, and gave it up. What? Said Marlowe. It doesn't matter. It's not important. It's just one of the things I happened to find out while I was talking with the old one, the same old one whom Jim talked with. By the way, Jim was seeing things. He's not a Martian at all. Wait a minute. What is he then? Oh, I guess he's a native of Mars, all right, but he isn't what you and I mean by Martian. At least he didn't look like one to me. Well, what did he look like? Describe him. McCrae looked puzzled. Uh, I can't. Maybe Jim and I each saw what he wanted us to see. Never mind. Willis has to go back to the Martians, and rather soon. I'm sorry, Marlowe answered. Jim won't like that, but it's not a high price to pay if it pleases them. You don't understand. You don't understand at all. Willis is the key to the whole thing. Certainly he's been mixed up in it, agreed Marlowe, but why the key? Marlowe rubbed his temples. It's very complicated, and I don't know where to start. Willis is important. Look, Jamie, you'll go down in history as the father of your country, no doubt. But between ourselves, Jim should be credited for Willis's love for Jim and Jim's staunch befriending of him. That the colonists are alive today instead of pushing up daisies. The ultimatum to get off this globe represented a concession made to Jim. They had intended to exterminate us. Marlowe's mouth dropped open. But that's impossible. Martians wouldn't do anything like that. Could and would, McRae stated flatly. They've been having doubts about us for a long time. Beecher's notion of shipping Willis off to a zoo pushed them over the edge. But Jim's relationship to Willis pulled them back again. They compromised. I can't believe that they would, protested Marlowe, nor can I see how they could. Where's Beecher? McRae said bluntly. Yes. So don't talk to me about what they can or can't do. We don't know anything about them, not anything. I can't argue with you, but can you clear up some of this mystery about Jim and Willis? Why do they care? After all, Willis is just a bouncer. I don't think I can clear it up, McRae admitted, but I can sure lace it around with some theories. Do you know Willis's Martian name? Do you know what it means? I didn't know he had one. It means, in whom the hopes of a world are joined. That suggest anything to you? Gracious, no. I may have translated it badly. Maybe it means young hopeful or merely hope. Maybe Martians go in for poetical meanings like we do. Take my name, Donald, means world ruler. My parents sure muffed that one. Or maybe Martians enjoy giving bouncers fancy names. I once knew a Pekingese called, believe it or not, Grand Champion Manchu Prince of Belvedere. McCrae looked suddenly startled. Do you know, I just remembered that dog's friends and family name was Willis? You don't say. I do say. The doctor scratched the stubble on his chin and reflected that he should shave one of these weeks. But it's not even a coincidence. I suggested the name Willis to Jim in the first place. I was probably thinking of that peak. Engaging little devil with a pop-eyed way of looking at you, just like Willis, our Willis, which is to say that neither one of Willis's names necessarily means anything. He sat so long without saying anything that Marlowe said, you aren't clearing up the mystery very fast. You think that Willis's real name does mean something? You do, don't you? Else you wouldn't have brought it up. McRae sat up with a jerk. I do. I do indeed. I think Willis's name is meant literally. Now, wait a minute. Don't throw anything. I won't get violent. What do you think Willis is? Me? Said Marlowe. I think he's an example of exotic Martian fauna, semi-intelligent and adapted to his environment. Big words, complained the doctor. I think he is what a Martian is before he grows up. Marlowe looked pained. There is no similarity of structure. They're as different as chalk and cheese. Granted, what's the similarity between a caterpillar and a butterfly? Marlowe opened his mouth and closed it. I don't blame you, McCrae went on. We never think of such a metaphor in a connection with higher types, whatever a higher type is. But I think that is what Willis is, and it appears to be why Willis has to go back to his people soon. He's in the nymph stage. He's about to go into a pupal stage, some sort of long hibernation. When he comes out, he'll be a Martian. Marlowe chewed his lip. There's nothing unreasonable about it, just startling. Everything about Mars is startling, but if my theory is correct, and mind you, I'm not saying it is, then it might explain why Willis is such an important personage, eh? Marlowe said wearily, You ask me to assimilate too much at once. Emulate the Red Queen. I'm not through. I think the Martians have still another stage, the stage of the old one to whom I talked, and I think it's the strangest one of all. Jamie, can you imagine a people having close and everyday relations with heaven, their heaven, as close and matter of fact as the relations between, say, the United States and Canada? Doc, I'll imagine anything you tell me to. We speak of the Martian otherworld. What does it mean to you? Nothing, some sort of trance such as the East Indians indulge in. I ask you because I talked, so they told me, to someone in the other world, the old one, I mean. Jamie, I think I negotiated our new colonization treaty with a ghost. Now just keep your seat, McRae went on. I'll tell you why. I was getting nowhere with him, so I changed the subject. We were talking basic, by the way. He had picked Jim's brains. He knew every word that Jim might know and none that Jim couldn't be expected to know. I asked him to assume, for the sake of argument, that we were to be allowed to stay, in which case would the Martians let us use their subway system to get to Copaeus. I rode one of those subways to the conference. Very clever. The acceleration is always down, as if the room was mounted on gimbals. The old one had trouble understanding what I wanted. Then he showed me a globe of Mars, very natural, except that it had no canals. Gecko was with me, just as he was with Jim. The old one and Gecko had a discussion, the gist of which was, what year was I at? Then the globe changed before my eyes, bit by bit. I saw the canals crawl across the face of Mars. I saw them being built, Jim. Now I ask you, he concluded, what kind of a being is it that has trouble remembering which millennium he's in? Do you mind if I tag him as a ghost? I don't mind anything, Marlowe assured him. Maybe we're all ghosts. I've given you one theory, Jamie. Here is another. Bouncers and Martians and old ones are entirely separate races. Bouncers are third class citizens, Martians are second class citizens, and the real owners we never see because they live down underneath. They don't care what we do with the surface as long as we behave ourselves. We can use the park, we can even walk on the grass, but we mustn't frighten the birds. Or maybe the old ones are just hypnosis that Gecko used on me. Maybe it's bouncers and Martians only. You name it. I can't, said Marlowe. I'm satisfied you managed to negotiate an agreement that permits us to stay on Mars. I suppose it will be years before we understand the Martians. You are putting it mildly, Jamie. A white man was still studying the American Indian, trying to find out what makes him tick 500 years after Columbus. And the Indians and the Europeans are both men, as like as two peas. These are Martians. We'll never understand them. We aren't even headed in the same direction. McCrae stood up. I want to get a bath and some sleep after I see Jim. Just a minute. Doc, do you think we'll have any real trouble making this autonomy declaration stick? It's got to stick. Relations with the Martians are 8 times as delicate as we thought they were. Absentee ownership isn't practical. Imagine trying to settle issues like this one by taking a vote back on Earth among board members that have never even seen a Martian. That's not what I mean. How much opposition will we run into? McRae scratched his chin again. Men have had to fight for their liberties before, Jamie. I don't know. It's up for us to convince the folk back on Earth that autonomy is necessary. With the food and population problem back on Earth being what it is, they'll do anything necessary once they realize what we're up against to keep the peace and continue migration. They don't want anything to hold up the project. I hope you're right. In the long run, I have to be right. We've got the Martians pitching on our team. Well, I'm on my way to break the news to Jim. He's not going to like it, said Jim's father. He'll get over it. Probably he'll find another bouncer and teach him English and call him Willis too. Then he'll grow up and not make pets of bouncers. It won't matter. He looked thoughtful and added, but what becomes of Willis? I wish I knew. The end. And we will start a new story by Robert Heinlein next time.